Like, if you need motivation to show up for the thing that you're doing, then it's not your craft. The thing you show up to do every day is the thing that will get you through to tomorrow, not the other way around. So I think motivation is the enemy of success, believe it or not. In a world where you feel motivated about things, when that feeling leaves you, so does the work.
What would you say is the biggest risk you've taken so far in your career?
Not so much on the sense of like, is it a risk to me and my family, but more so the risk has been, as the team grows, as we build more things, the decisions I make, it's like the boat's getting bigger, and so turning takes longer. Like, this is what I tell people on these projects when I'm like, hey, like, this is what's going to happen to you. I know you have all these like wonderful ideas and come in here and do all this cool stuff, but really what they're going to do is they're going to tie your hands behind your back, tie your feet, gag you, and throw you in a corner and say, go figure it out, right? That's what it's like to work in a secure environment.
What's the story behind the name Merlin Minds?
Oh man, in normal software engineering, like there's normally this like phrase, and it's like, that was a wizard play, or like, oh, if you have a problem, you should go see such and such, he's the wizard. And so I was like, oh, that's fun, we should definitely embody that. And so like, there's no better wizard than Merlin. And so I was like, cool, we'll do Merlin, that'll be fun.
Hey there, this is Kaemon with Merlin Minds, back for episode 2 of our podcast with the founder and CEO, Walter Day. So we're going to pick up where we started off last time. Let's go ahead and dig into the podcast stuff. So something that we didn't get to last time, and I want to pick up on now, is kind of give an idea to the people listening, what things look like from your side. So for a bit of a typical question, I'll just kind of dive in. What does a day in the life of you as a business owner and a DevOps expert typically look like? What's a normal day, if there is a normal day for you?
Yeah, so days usually fall into like one of two buckets for me. I have like maker days and management days, if that makes sense. So I try to treat like a lot of what I do is like you either need to be in one mode or the other. And so usually Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays are like my maker days, and Tuesdays and Thursdays are my management days. So I take most of my customer calls on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I push most of our code Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Okay.
So for me, that's kind of like the normal workflow.
Got it. Okay, cool. I like that you break it up into different types of days. It helps make sure like you're not like wasting time on like switching context back and forth constantly and multitasking, right?
Yeah, because like the context switching has a cost. There's no like unlimited context switch. And so when I can get like big blocks for customers or for our application or for the team, like that's where we get the most work done. So I think that's the most important.
Awesome. Cool. And so kind of continuing that thread, any habits or routines that you think have been like really important to your success in running Merlin Minds?
Yeah, so one of the things I try to embody, but I'm not great at, is the whole when you fit, like basically whenever you set your training to be is like when you are put your back up against the wall and you have to like deliver, and if the wheels fall off the bus, whatever your training is what you fall back to. So for me, like what I try to do is to make sure that I have like constants in the morning. Like we always plan for the day, even if the day kind of gets away from us. We always make sure that expectations are set clear in stone, both for myself and for other people, so that when things get really busy, everybody knows what they owe, even when I'm not around. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just try to make smart systems to kind of make sure we can get through the day. I'd love to tell you that I wake up at 4 a.m. and grind set mindset, but like I'm human and that's not realistic. So
no, instead you start your workout at like what, 5:30 a.m. or something like a madman?
No, we're getting closer to 6 these days, but
hey, that's
not too bad.
That's stronger earlier than I could be. So props to that.
Right on.
So, to kind of flip from like the success side, like have you ever faced self-doubt while running Merlin Minds? And if so,
always.
And like how did you push through that? How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's the thing I say to everybody. You just keep showing up. And so like there's this, I don't know, like where people just are like, oh, like one day you showed up and then you had all this success. Realistically, it's just like, nah, we just keep showing up, and over time you just kind of start winning because all of your, snowballs start rolling downhill instead of uphill.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. And also, it's like, who or what inspires you most in your work? And how do you stay motivated, like whenever things get challenging?
Yeah, so I think motivation is the enemy of success, believe it or not. Like in a world where you feel motivated about things, when that feeling leaves you, so does the work, if that makes sense. So, like, really, what I try to do is there's this book called The Art of War, and it's written by, oh, geez, I'm going to pull it up because I can never remember his name. Or, excuse me, The War of Art. I think we've talked about this briefly.
We have. I forget the author though.
The author's name, because it's super important to me,
Stephen
is
Pressfield.
Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like Stephen Pressfield talks about like being professional and showing up, right? And so this whole like motivation thing, I don't get it. I don't know that I'll ever get it. It's a lot of like, hey, what do you like if you need a motivation to show up for the thing that you're doing, then it's not your craft, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the thing you show up to do every day is the thing that will get you through to tomorrow, not the other way around. So like to give like for anybody who is like getting into platform engineering or looking to mature in whatever field that they're in, really you should just show up as the thing that you want to be, if that makes sense. So if you want to be, a staff engineer, you just show up as a staff engineer every day, and like you'll learn the things along the way as a professional to get there.
Yeah, I think it's actually really wise to like not rely on inspiration because inspiration is so fleeting that if you rely on that, like whenever you do have those moments, it feels incredibly empowering and just like you can do anything in the world, but that's not sustainable. You can't be inspired and like 10 out of 10 excited day in and day out whenever you're building something. Like inevitably you'll lose that moment, and if that's what you were relying on as the crux of everything and you lose it, then you're gonna have no gas in the tank.
Yeah, I will say though there is like the meeting the muse, or like the chasing the muse, that it is something that I do strive for in like a day-to-day basis. In the thing that I think so interesting about that is like a lot of times that gets called like flow state or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting into flow state is like this like elusive like dragon that we tend to chase as engineers. And so I found that like if you just show up, eventually like the muse will find you instead of like trying to seek her out. So if you like always have a place that you go to do your work or to do something, like the muse will find you. And I think that's kind of the thing. If you're like, well, what do you chase? That like that feeling of like, okay, everything is kind of working together to solve a goal. Things are difficult, but like my knowledge is in a place where like we can get through it. I think the place where you lose most of your motivation is when you get to the next step, and then like the chasm between where you are and where you want to be is so far that like you don't have enough chutzpah to get to the next phase before the motivation dies out.
Yeah, I think that's I think very well said. Okay, great. Well, and maybe this ties back to that, but like any decisions that you'd like to highlight from early on in your career that you think just like really changed everything for you.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest steps was just realizing that. So a little backstory. Traditionally, I didn't start with computer science. I came from a non-traditional background, as most founders tend to, and I realized that like in the normal job system, there was this like clear gatekeeping for opportunity based off of certifications and degrees, more so than anything degrees. And so when I realized that the difference between like where I wanted to be and where I was just knowledge, that was like this huge unlock for me. And so it made it a lot easier to be able to be like, okay, well, now I can control my income because I know I can do A, B, and C, and then like go and test the marketplace. If I'm good enough, the marketplace will give me opportunity to do what I need to do. If I'm not, then I should be here, if that makes sense. And so with that, I was able to kind of like just continuously pivot over and over and over again. I remember once I interviewed for a staff like AI role at Palo Alto Networks, which is like a big firm. This is like 5 years ago, and they were like, "Hey, you jump around a lot, like in jobs. Like, why do you do that?" And it's like, well, opportunity is opportunity, and that's kind of like when I started to think about like, well, when am I going to do this for myself? Because the only person I think I'll ever be able to stick with is, me. So I think that's when it started. The whole like, oh, the knowledge I have versus the knowledge I need are within reach. You just have to go get them, and then you have to be willing to like test the marketplace to see if like your bet made sense. So taking bets and placing bets is like the big. mind shift for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to like kind of embody your career because I've known you through all of it. And, I remember when you had graduated with your degree in political science. And I remember you first talking about getting into computer science and thinking, oh, that's different, but I could see that working out for you. And never did I think, not that I didn't have faith in you, but whenever you were first thinking, oh yeah, I'll get a a job, programming. I never thought it would end in us having this conversation with not end, but
Right.
it would eventually yield a conversation like this with us working together and you owning a company centered around that, around tech that we back then we had only dreamed of AI and automation being this level. Like we didn't expect it to come this far. And
Right.
you've only become such an expert with that because you've continually you know taking those calculated risks and making and placing those bets.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of fun. I think that's the secret sauce. Like, you have to find a way to make this stuff fun. It's very boring and complicated, and there's not a lot of like room for art in the beginning, if that makes sense. And I think it's important to find a way to get back to making it fun, or you'll never make it.
Yeah, absolutely. Work is work, but if you can have fun with it and do exciting new things, then it's much more enjoyable, and that puts you in the position where you can continue to innovate and do more new, exciting, and valuable things instead of just living Groundhog Day, right?
Right.
Cool. Well, pivoting over a bit to the way that other business owners may be looking to this for advice and like experience and stuff. I'll ask this: like, what's one mistake you see business owners making when it comes to scaling their operations and taking their business up to the next level?
Yeah, I think that there is an overemphasis on planning. So let's go back a little bit. Regardless of the maturity of a business, a lot of times they get attacked by what I like to call the what if monster.
Mm,
And the what if monster tends to be this thought of like, oh, well, what if this one edge case happens, or this one edge case happens, or what if we're not prepared for A, B, and C? So there's a lot of planning, which I think is super important, especially as you're scaling from like 50 employees to 100 employees and 100 to 500 and et cetera to et cetera. Same for customers by like magnitudes of 10 or whatever. But the reality of the situation is the application that you have that services 10,000 customers is not the same application that you're going to have that's going to service 100,000 customers. And so it's really easy to get into what I call like philosophy porn on like how you want the world to look when you're done. And so what I like to do with them is I like to sit them down and say like, okay, where are we right now? And what would be the next magnitude of progress that would get you to the next state, right? And normally they don't think like that. They think at the end, which is great. Like there's the whole start with the end in mind, which I think is super important. And like a normal 12 factor application will get you to the end in mind. But everything that happens in between is super important. You can't just take an MVP that is like setups whatever, however it's set up, servicing 10,000 customers, and then magically have it service 100 million customers, right? Like, yes, orchestration and platform automation can get you there, but that doesn't mean that your infrastructure, as far as like your app APIs and things like that, are set to handle all of those requests. And so normally you want to take it by a reasonable magnitude that your team can support and scale there. And then once we've gotten there, it's time to have a conversation on like, okay, we've scaled from 10 engineers to 50. You're servicing, 100 times the number of customers you were servicing before. Like, do you really need to scale to 1 million customers? Do you think that's realistic? And if so, now we need to have a conversation on like the roadmap to make that happen. And so really, I think it just boils down to go for the next magnitude, not the end result as a business owner. And then it'll make it a lot easier to get from A to B instead of like going from A to Z.
yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Break it down to pieces, with it being by orders of magnitude. So if you have 100 happy clients, you shouldn't be planning for tens of millions. At that point, you should be,
Right.
if you have a few hundred happy clients, and you should then be looking to move to a few thousand. And
Yes,
and
absolutely, right? Because any magnitude shift that's greater than one is going to directly increase the revenue for the business,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so in a world where you have like you're making $200,000 monthly recurring revenue for your application stack, and you just double the number of customers you support, you've just doubled the income, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you've doubled the staff. And so that's the kind of magnitude that like gives huge unlocks for startups from going from like pre-seed to Series A to Series B to Series C.
So this ties in with scaling and growing a business. Whenever you're growing your business to the next level, that requires investments on a lot of different levels. So, what's a piece of advice you would give to business owners who might be hesitant about investing in technology or expertise?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that this kind of goes. I'm gonna kind of tease this out because this is a really big question.
Yes.
First things first is it's like depending on where you are as a founder, not all of them are technical. Some of them are business. Some of them are like targeted specialists, right? So they are the customer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're a pilot, you're building a flight scheduling app, you're probably the customer, right? So kind of understanding that is super important. Is it B2B? Is it B2C, etc.? And that will help to determine where we want to scale and why. And so a lot of times businesses, especially older businesses, see a lot of resistance to like moving to cloud native because there's a lot of like bad press right now on Amazon and GCP and Azure on the normal like cloud computing costs. And so really it's just a conversation about like, okay, empathetically speaking, like me coming to you as a founder, like what are your biggest pain points? Oh, my biggest pain point right now is it takes me 45 minutes to get a build out to like test the new feature. Okay, well, you're lucky to get 8 hours of it out of a developer each day. If it takes them 20 to 30 minutes to do the code change and another 30 to 40 minutes to test the code change, that means if you're lucky, you're getting seven iterations a day, right? And so the question is like, is that pound for pound worth the time, right? So we start to think about the time, we start to think about the opportunity cost of the platform being in the cloud, and then with that we can decide like, okay, cool, maybe this is going to cost us twice as much in infrastructure, but does that mean we can service 10 times as many customers? And then you can start kind of teasing away at the value add of moving into a world where you own your own platform. And that's not to say on-prem isn't important. It's just normally like when people come find us, it's because they have an app that they need to move into the cloud or they're servicing a startup and they need to get their application into a place where it can handle more customers. So knowing the founder, knowing the need, and then knowing how to scale that up, I think are like the big important pieces.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So a bit of maybe a bit of a broader question, but still related to these others. If an owner feels stuck in their business growth, what's the first step that they should be taking to move it forward, get unstuck?
Yeah, I'm really bad at this. So you guys can laugh at me in about a year. But you kind of got to get out of your own way. If you're an operator, if you've been in an operator mode as a founder, meaning you're in the day to day, you're technical like me. You're probably in it all the time. And when you're in it all the time, you don't have a lot of time to like pull yourself out of the day to day and actually like build the roadmap, right? So it's a lot easier to have that conversation like we talked about earlier, where you're like, I want to be at Z because it's like, oh, if I'm at Z, then we're good to go, right? But you haven't had time to pull yourself out of operations and actually like be like, oh, there's a bunch of other letters in between A and Z. That's crazy, And so making time to get out of the business is super important. And so, that's a good place to bring us in because if you're in the ops of like making the application deployable and serviceable to your customers, you don't have time to think about the direction of your business. And so, by bringing us on, we can take over a lot of that platform burden and then you can focus on the things that are really important, like features for your customers.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like a lot of it is like zooming out, like getting out of the what different business owners will find to be like their day to day. That's often based on their background.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with technical founders who will get in the weeds with their development. I've worked with founders who have a background in marketing and all they could think about was the marketing of it and the marketing plan. One of my bosses was a sales guy, and so he did sales first and everything and would get obsessed with that. And I'd often see them falling into this trap of being so in the weeds and so stuck
Right.
with that one part of their business that they never took the time to step away from that to have their employees work on that and then say, okay, we need to make this roadmap of what it's like to move forward. And yes, I have Z in mind, but we're at we're at C. How do we get to D? I think that's a really
Yeah.
good piece of advice, and that's and it's I think it's natural for business owners to fall into that because they often start a business because they're very good at something. Um,
Right.
but then becoming a business owner, you have to not just be very good at your one thing, you have to be a good business owner, and that takes a lot of skills.
Right. Lots of hats, lots of juggling. And to juggle all of those things, normally you have to like give up your mastery in the space that that made you start the business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay. I wonder if this is going to tie back to one of your earlier answers. What's a piece of advice that you received as a business owner that you think really shaped your journey in all of this?
It's really hard because it's like there's not a lot of good advice for charting a new course, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's not like I started an accounting firm and it's like a very cut and dry, it is what it is, right? And so I think the best advice I've ever gotten was from like adventure books. Like it sounds so silly, but it's like the reality of the situation is, you know, my company's like wizard themed. It's like I am this like bespoke wizard in this like silly field that is like very super ultra niche, right? And so it's like, oh, what's a great business advice? Well, to be fair, there's not a lot of platforms and consulting firms out there that like just do platform services. It's usually like they sell you, an observability package or a DevOps package or a staff augmentation package. And so it's a lot of like, if you were just selling that one thing, it'd be very easy to say like, ah, yes, we build the widgets and you'd like to buy the widgets, kind sir. And these are the widgets that we provide. Right. And it's a lot more of like, okay, interesting. Like, what is the actual value add that makes this business valuable? And so I think the biggest success I've had is it goes back to like the whole, like the difference between where you are and where you want to be is the knowledge that you're missing. So just kind of getting that feedback from customers has been like my biggest success point.
Yeah, excellent. I think that focusing on like customer feedback and how they
Yeah.
respond to what you're doing is really important. But I also really love the what you're saying with it's hard to get like advice that works for everyone when it's all focused on forging your own path. Like
Right.
Frodo had a lot of help along the way to Mount Doom, but he wasn't just handed a travel guide and be like, here's how you get to Mount Doom. And
Right.
here's all
Right.
the obstacles you'll run into. Like he didn't know. He just knew he was the person, the hobbit to accept this grand journey, and he had to be the guy to do it. But there's no way he could have known all the answers going into it. He had to forge his own path.
Right. And so I think that's like the big, like, what is the advice? The advice is forge your own path and like just be okay with that. Like the reason why, like the thing for me, I'm like, oh man, all my friends, they have businesses and they're so successful. And it's like, oh wait, they've actually been doing this forever. And like in the grand scheme of things, what's an extra year in figuring it out if you figured it out?
Mm-hmm.
So
Excellent. Okay. Well, what's a lesson that you might have learned from failure, and how has that made you better as a business owner or an entrepreneur?
yeah, so I think the biggest advice there, like big lesson learned is if you didn't break it, did you actually learn anything?
Mm,
And I know that sounds so silly, but a lot of the times in platform, especially when you're like building APIs and backends and things like that, you're gonna break it. And so like getting over that fear of like, oh, I'm gonna break this thing, because like there's a lot of like, when I work with my understudy, a lot of the time she's like, hey, like, is it okay if I do this, this, and that? And it's like, just break it, bro. Like you're gonna learn so much more from breaking it than you will from not breaking it. And that's kind of how you get the reps in to kind of see the matrix and know what to do.
yeah, absolutely. Mistakes are a key part of experience, and that really helps you like truly know something holistically. Because if you just
Right.
kind of nail it the first time, then it's really hard even to be confident and be like, oh, did I just stumble to the right thing? I think I did this the right way,
Right.
even if it's working, versus you broke it 5 different times and then you fixed it and now it's working great and you know all the reasons why it's
Right. And it doesn't break anymore.
yeah.
And just to kind of like spin off of that, like when I worked at Kraken or worked with big firms that have like products with tons and tons of customers, like the reason why that's so important is like in the future when you have like observability and you're having like postmortems when a bad thing happens because bad things happen. You now know like, oh cool, when the bad thing happens, like we have a process for like dealing with the bad thing, and then there's a way like we now have the knowledge to fix it forever, so that bad thing never happens again, right? And so every time it's like every time you break something, you rash it up, and you're less likely to break something the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good way to go about it, and that's something I really like about you as a business owner is you saying like, hey, like mistakes will happen, we will screw things up, like no, you know, nobody will be in trouble for it. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. We can all learn from it, and just
Right,
by like having that mindset, but also the process for like, okay, inevitably this thing will break. What do we do
right,
whenever it's broken, and how are we better in the future? Is what makes it more resilient, and that kind of honestly ties back to ties back to like the individual lesson of it. You know, that also works on the larger scale of an organization.
right, absolutely.
Cool. Um, well, if you could give like one golden rule for running a successful business, what would that be?
Yeah, I think this is more of like a life question because like every founder is different and like everyone runs their company a little differently, and then ultimately that thing becomes the embodiment of the founder until the founder gets out of their own way. And so for me, that one thing is to start at the root of the problem. You know, because it's very easy to get emotional about something and be in a situation where you're like, like this sucks, you know, but it's like, okay, what's the actual problem? The problem is this. Okay, cool. Well, now we can have a conversation about it. It has a name. It's not this obscure like thing that we're afraid of. And it makes it really easy to kind of like be honest about what's going on and solve real problems.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a great answer. You know, start at the root of the problem, move from there. All right, so mind telling us about a time that you felt like giving up, but you chose not to?
Oh man, there's so many. I don't know, some fun things. So sometimes, especially like with my DoD customers or customers that are security conscious, they end up having their own data centers. And so a lot of times we end up getting requests or features that need to be added to the platform when the platform is already constrained, meaning that we have to get creative about the way that we solve problems. And in getting creative, sometimes you have your hands tied behind your back. Like this is what I tell people on these projects when they onboard. I'm like, hey, like this is what's going to happen to you. I know you have all these like wonderful ideas, and you think that we're going to be able to like you're a maverick and come in here and do all this cool stuff. But really, what they're going to do is they're going to tie your hands behind your back, tie your feet, gag you, and throw you in a corner and say, go figure it out. Right. That's what it's like to work in a secured environment. And so a lot of times, all of the things where you're like, oh, we should just do this, like don't exist. Right. And so you continue to have to like solve problems in a way where it's like you not only are have tunnel vision, but the tools at your disposal are very limited. And so you kind of have to be good at the thing you want to do in order to solve that problem. And so that's usually like super duper difficult, but it does force you to be a little creative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the wizard branding, we're allowed to lean into the nerd references, but it's like Tony Stark in the cave building the first Iron Man suit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's fun. It's always fun. And I think that's kind of like the difference between like me and maybe another consulting firm is like I see those constraints as like ways to create something beautiful, you know, instead of like being sad about there not being cool things.
Yeah, I think that's I actually really like that thread because I'm a big believer in that whether it's in work or creative endeavors or just socially that our limitations are what define us in like a really beautiful way. And whether
Right.
that's like your own limitation of, you know, the things you're not very good at. Like I'm not a good software developer. That has me working.
I doubt that. You've just never spent time doing it, right? It's like the whole like I'm not very good at music, but really it's like it's a time thing.
But where I'm going with that is okay. Well, that means like I should spend more time with the cool software developers I know. Um, but even like within the specific things you do, whatever it is, like your limitations do define you, and that like makes you unique and different, and puts you in a position where you're looking at it differently than other people. So I really like that as a thread.
Yeah.
Well, What would you say is the biggest risk you've taken so far in your career, and then how did that turn out? If
I mean, jumping in on my own business is full time is definitely the risk, right? Not so much on the sense of like, is it a risk to me and my family, but more so the risk has been, as the team grows, as we build more things, the decisions I make, it's like the boat's getting bigger, and so turning takes longer, if
mm-hmm.
that makes sense. And so right now, a lot of my decisions are revolved around like what we do in by the end of 2025, and then by the end of 2026, to make sure that like everybody who's on the bus can stay on the bus. And so the risks here are like, where do we place our chips, right? Like I knew as an employee where to place my chips in order to get a raise, but it's different when you're placing your chips on the business and everyone inside of it to make sure that the ship is ready for the storms that are coming over the water.
Yeah, absolutely. I expected that your answer might be starting your own business. So, the how did it turn out part, you know, we can see how it's going so far, but it's
Right.
we're not at the end of the journey yet. We haven't tossed the ring into the lava of Mount Doom quite yet. um,
Right.
um, okay. Well, what's kind of going back to things are gonna break. Things are going to go
Sure.
ways you didn't expect. What's a surprising lesson that you've learned from a project that didn't go as planned?
Let's see. So we've had plenty of those, but I think the biggest thing I've learned, especially like with this one of my first or second consulting gigs, is a lot of times people just want you to be honest with them, right? And so like I've noticed that there's like types of engagements where like the founder intentionally like hires a firm so that they have like a scapegoat or
Mm.
whatever. And then normally that firm is in a situation where they're like, oh, well, I couldn't do my job because like I didn't have the things that I needed to be successful. And a lot of times when you're just honest with people, whether it be founders, directors, or even employees, if you're like, hey, like I tried to do the thing that you asked for, there were a bunch of unknown unknowns. Like here's the document kind of outlining that reality. Like, I'm sorry. Here's what we can do to make it better if you want to. And if not, that's okay. And just kind of being at peace with like I am proud of the work that I've done and that we have done, and I know that we've done the best that we could with like the expectations that were set and the things that we were given. And so like if someone's unhappy, then either there was something that from a technical perspective was like way out of scope and we had to go figure it out, or maybe we just didn't get the support from the team that we needed because they were too busy with other things, which happens. And in that world, there needs to be a conversation about like, hey, like this is the actual state of reality. We're not upset about anything, but like this is real. And if you're upset about the outcomes, let's have a conversation. We can try to fix them.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Is like just focusing on honesty and transparency. Like I've worked in sales a lot, and that's something I always felt went a long way was just to be like very honest and real with people because I've seen a lot of especially not a typecast but like older more experienced salespeople always kind of stringing people along or telling people what they think they want to hear, but what people really want to hear is the truth and
Right.
get an honest get an honest answer and be talking to like the real like it's a real person talking to a real person. They want to know the reality of it and the why behind it. So I think that's a great answer. So we've kind of danced around this a little bit. What's the story behind the name Merlin Mines, and how does it?
Oh man.
Yeah, let's start with that. What's the story? Where's this come from?
So like in normal software engineering, like there's normally this like phrase, and it's like, oh man, what a wizard! That was a wizard play, or like oh such and such is a wizard at this company, or like oh if you have a problem, you should go see such and such. He's the wizard. And so I was like, oh that's fun. We should definitely embody that. And so like there's no better wizard than Merlin. And so I was like, cool, we'll do Merlin. That'll be fun. And so at the time, I don't know, 27, 20, 2020, when did we start this? 2021, 2022, when the business started. So we were in like the second bull run of the crypto marketplace. And so I was like doing Ethereum mining, right? And Bitcoin mining, just in AWS in my own platform. And so I was like, oh, like Merlin Mines, that's great. That's where the industry is moving. That's what we got going on. Like mining is like this like thing. I was like, we'll get into crypto. It'll be super cool. And like, we'll just be the wizards of Web3. Um, So that's kind of where the name came from originally. And it's just like anything. Like look at all the brands right now, right? Everybody's got like .ai,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just like your name, and usually ends up being a symptom of like whatever marketing is available during your like inception.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I knew the answer to that, but yeah, I love that you've leaned into that because I've always seen you as a master wizard, and you've always, we've always both loved, fantasy and sci-fi, and I'm pretty sure in the vast majority of fantasy games that we've played together, given the opportunity, you'll go for a wizard. Uh,
Yeah, they're always busted.
yeah,
It's like
wizards are fun. Like, what's more fun than doing magic?
I don't know. I think like being a rogue's pretty cool.
Being a rogue is cool. They're not done very well, very often. But
Yeah.
as a musician, as you can see over my shoulder, love a good bard. Huge shout out to Baldur's Gate 3 for being one of the first games to make bards really really cool and not dorky.
Yeah, it's definitely the Bard in Baldur's Gate is amazing. Certainly need to get you a company name eventually that is the equivalent in Bard speak.
We'll need to track that down. I don't know what's the I don't know what's the best like famous classical bard, but we'll come back to that.
Right.
Um, so if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice about business, what would that piece be?
Oh man, about business just in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the same advice that we gave for just about everything else, right? Like there is no shortcut. You have to show up. And, even when you like outsource things or do things like uh, when you are young, you feel invincible and that you have all this time. And as you grow older, you realize that there is not a lot of time. And you kind of have to shift, especially as like a developer. As a developer, you're like, oh, I can do everything myself because I'm a developer and I can
Mm-hmm.
build anything. But the reality of the situation is like you cannot, and you need to bring on help to help you get from point A to point B to point C, like we talked about earlier. And so like knowing what pieces to give up is important.
Mm.
And I think that is by dumping all of your stats into one thing as a person, as your younger self, right, to try to become a master at something, inevitably you can't be good at other things. And so like just because you've made it to the top of like whatever you're great at, whatever underwater basket weaving thing is your thing, doesn't mean you're going to be good at all the other things, and that's okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. Well, what's a myth about like entrepreneurship or DevOps that you'd like to debunk in this podcast?
Hmm. A myth it would be, I don't know. One of the things that I think is interesting about platform engineering is a lot of people are scared of Kubernetes or distributed services, right? The reality of the situation is nobody cares about Kubernetes. Nobody cares about the platform. All that people care about is that the trains leave on time and they'll arrive on time. And so when you're thinking about platform, like to demystify it for you, the platform is just a train station that you get on every time you push a code or something that you want to get to your customer. And there's a system in place to get it from point A to point B to point C to point D. And so when you're thinking about your platform, just think about it like that. You've bought a ticket on the for the train, and you've got on the train, and you're going to the next station. All of the like woo woo complexity around like all of the like extra pieces, like it is literally just a train station. That's it.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, wrapping up this section, and I'm wondering if it's going to be same as the book you'd referenced earlier, but like, what's one book or podcast or like educational resource that's had the biggest impact on your career? Was it The War of Art?
No, no, no. The one like the biggest unlock for me was like the Five Rings of Miyamoto. That book primarily is from like a generalist perspective, and he talks about how like people on your team, or like even for you, like you always need to be striving for the thing that is like right outside of reach technically, right? So if you are a level one engineer or like a junior marketer or whatever, like you want to be doing the thing at the level above, or the thing that's three or four levels above, and thinking like that, if that makes sense. Because really like the knowledge and the time is the unlock. If you've got both of those, nothing can really hold you back. And so, the one thing you want to avoid is just being in a situation where you're like, ah, well, I am a, whatever. I do Golang and that's all I do. And it's like, cool, well, that's what you're going to do then, right? Like, think above that. Like, oh, I do Golang, but now I'm like a delivery lead. I do Golang, but now I can be the director of engineering, like that kind of thing, right? I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Like always reaching to that next piece. Like otherwise you're going to end up like locked in and like only doing that one thing, and you do that one thing well, but you're not going to be able to continue to grow and expand your skill set, or you really see your true potential unless you're always eager and reaching up to that next piece and expanding, right?
Right.
Well, Walter, thanks so much for joining today. I'll be seeing you, before the holidays, but we'll be doing another one of these post-holiday season. I guess all these are going to be dropping post-holidays, so this outro probably doesn't make any sense. um,
Yeah. Thanks for making time.